Hello.
Hello.
All right, there we go. How's it going?
Good.
Yo, yo, yo.
Enjoying this gray
Hey,
Seattle day.
it just looks very bright from here. So,
Yeah, this saturated window behind me that you can never see what's out there. Today it's
yeah.
gray, but it's been a lot of heat lately, which is nice for some people, but I'm a cold person. So
Yeah, I heard something about that. Something about that. I don't know. Got a little hot in Seattle.
just
Something.
a little bit, kind of like we were in the
Yeah.
desert, like Phoenix.
Like Death Valley. All right.
Yeah, that was
Screen
rough.
sharing. Your wish is my command. All right.
Hey.
Screen sharing is enabled. I was resolving to do these, so I'll go ahead and do it now. Welcome everybody to July 13th. Yes, 13th meeting of Kubernetes SIG Multicluster. Laura Lauren's dominant on the agenda today. Go ahead, Laura.
Haha, thank you. Hopefully you guys are seeing the meeting notes.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Crystal clear.
Crystal clear, great. Okay, so I have two things. I wanted to give some quick KEP updates, and then I wanted to follow up on what Jeremy brought up last time about multi-cluster controller coordination, some changes going on in leader election package, blah, blah, blah. Naturally, I made slides for that too, so we can look at them all together. But anyway, so the quick KEP updates for multi-cluster DNS, I finally addressed some reviewer comments from like way back in April. And I don't know if Miguel is on the call, but he took a look and made some comments too. So thank you for looking. So I need to do another round of requesting approvals again. So I sent a note to John. And for cluster ID, I'm catching up on quite a large backlog of action items still. I started with updating the MCS API grad criteria, which we talked about back on 5.11. So finally getting that in. But the next steps, these have been talked about before, but just sort of reiterating for update purposes. Change cluster claim to cluster property everywhere, actually in the CAP cube builder, and copy of it, go of it into this repo that we made, make the API review request, and also circle back on that CRD bootstrapping stuff that was happening in SIG Arch again. I'm in the Slack channel about it. But I've been out of office, and that group has also been alternately out of office. So it hasn't moved that far since we last talked about it a while ago. So happy to take any questions about that too, but just wanted to give a quick update. And this also helped me put all of my action items in one place instead of in 90 different places. So that was also beneficial. And then from more of the discussion side, I want to open up, as mentioned, Jeremy brought up this pull request last time. And
Actually, before we get into this, I'm
yes,
curious,
sorry,
Laura,
go
have
ahead.
you heard anything about, like anything at all about the CRD bootstrapping progress? I'm just curious if,
Yeah, not materially since I gave my last update. Well, I guess one thing that happened since the last update was, which was on the announcement thread, so possibly people saw it, but if you, what am I trying to say, announcement thread? There's a SIG architecture that's thread that CC'd SIG, no, sorry, SIG API machinery thread that CC'd SIG multi-cluster, and the latest was that team saying, okay, we're going to write a CAP. We're also, that is going to focus on this, this, and that. And this and that being installation using the controller manager specifically. And they're also working on a POC related to that to see what they can write about it. You know what I mean?
okay.
Yeah, but then they were out of office and then I was out of office. So I don't know anything beyond that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think I just want to make sure that everyone's still on
Yeah.
the same page, because my impression is that really all we're waiting on there, we're not waiting on a like definitive solution. Just the idea that we will eventually be able to bootstrap CRDs if necessary. And we don't necessarily need that as a blocker. We just need to know that like one day that will be a possibility, and we're not closing doors.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think the problem that we've had is that that felt to be the case without anything like concrete behind it. And then this initiative has tried to put something more concrete around it and has received a lot of pushback for the ideas that are being presented. And then, but not a lot of sort of opening for what is, going to work for this case. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I said that very clearly, but no. There's some more no's happening to things than yeses, or yes, let's try this next. And so I think our interest is to make sure that either that yes and let's keep talking about the next thing is still happening, or get confront the situation and be like, it sounds like there's a lot of no's going on. Does that mean that this is no longer a pressure valve?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
That's my take.
I think that sounds like a pretty reasonable take. The other thing that I want to keep in mind here is like, we don't actually have like a concrete use case for requiring bootstrapping of cluster property yet. Right. So, I also I think we definitely need to make sure that we're not closing doors unnecessarily, but I'm also want to be cautious that we're not, creating blockers that don't necessarily need to be blockers.
Cool.
Yeah. And I think that's the right state of mind to be in. Are we going to talk about this now? Or are we going to talk about the leader election thing? I guess we're talking about this. There isn't anything about multi-cluster service discovery or any other thing that we have in progress that means that we have to have cluster property CRD installed as part of cluster bootstrap, right? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I think that's the same as when Jeremy's saying we don't have any known use cases, like they're not concrete, and we have a vibe, I guess, and vibe alone was not enough.
I like the way you put that.
To change the mechanics of anything. But I totally understand what y'all are saying, and I don't think we need to block a ton, but I do think there's interest from all of us, and I know Tim is interested too in keeping a pulse on it. It's not the biggest item on the agenda, on the action item backlog, in my opinion, if that.
It seems like the main motivator is, wouldn't it be cool if, I think it seems like it would be really useful to bootstrap cluster property. But that, it's really easy to get hung up on solving theoretical use cases.
Yeah, I think we can table this for now, since it doesn't have a lot of change right now, and there's other things that are actually blocking meaningfully for us. And then we can open the floor again, maybe in, I guess we're going to bi-weekly, but in 2 times or so is probably my guess.
Okay, awesome.
If that's, I see my little audio going up a lot, but I'm going to change the topic to the prioritized leader election. And as mentioned, I put together a few slides of what I think is going on, what I think the questions need to be, but feel free, especially Jeremy, since you brought it up, to interject if I'm off base. But just want to sort of seed an intro for everybody based on what I know, and then try and guide the discussion a little bit.
Yeah,
Oh, go
I don't
ahead.
know,
You
Laura,
go
maybe
first.
before
Yeah.
you get into the slides, I guess some context of why I brought this up and thought it was interesting is this third bullet where I was tagged. This is like seems like a pretty interesting use case. Like you've got controllers running in clusters all over the world, and you want to prefer the geographically closest region. But it gets kind of, there's a bunch of nuance here. Like if you're this seems reasonable and this would work, but if the controller is in the same cluster, if you'd need multiple clusters in the region for this really to be valuable, it seems. Like if your controller is just in your Asia cluster, then it would only be available when the cluster's up, and it would, leader election would be tough within that cluster if the cluster's down. And if your controller crashed when the cluster was up, it would probably be rescheduled. So like there's a lot of nuance, and I think this just kind of drew attention to like, well, this PR seems like it actually solves this nicely in some scenarios. There are a lot of kind of cross-region, cross-cluster controller or workload patterns that I think we're kind of surfacing, now that we've made it easier to spread workloads across clusters. And this SIG seems like a good place to come up with some answers.
So I've been scanning this while we've been talking. I definitely want more information on like the geo spread one, like closest to what? Like what does multi-region controller mean? Does it mean that one instance of the controller services multiple regions? Like I have so many questions.
So I can answer a bit of this because I've been speaking with the Istio folks, and that's where this is coming from. Originally as part of their support for MCS. But the idea is like Istio has decentralized, or it has a bunch of different controllers that use leader election to figure out which clusters they manage. So there's a bunch of different control plane workloads that are responsible for managing the multi-cluster services across clusters. And the trick for them is figuring out which instance should be responsible for configuring the actual the actual Istio configuration in each cluster. And so that's where they need some leader election. And you could use naive leader election with each cluster, but you end up, if you have a global deployment with clusters all over the world, you end up in a scenario where your US instance is controlling Europe, your Asia instance is controlling the US, and it just, it would still function, but it gets kind of ugly.
So it sounds like, I think what you described is like, we may have N number of controllers managing M, where M is greater than N number of like Istio configurations in different clusters. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And some sort of better coordination than just like random is desirable.
Right.
Probably.
Yeah. Is there any issue like within like in Istio repo that we can learn more about this? Like the context you just gave was very helpful. I wonder if it's written down anywhere. It doesn't appear to be present like in the pull request at all.
Yeah, let me see if I can dig it up. Or do we have any Istio community folks on the call today? So I'll see if I can dig it up, and I'll ping some of them to join next week, or I guess 2 weeks from now as well.
Cool. All right, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please feel free to proceed, Laura.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Thanks for the background, Jeremy. A little of my own background too, for some flavor of what's going on here. Specifically, besides that general background, this specific pull request is to edit the leader election package to do something kind of generic, provide a place for people to put arbitrary keys and a key comparison function so that there could be some more custom logic going on for leader election based on whatever library user writes into that key location and whatever that key comparison function can do. So my perspective is we might, from an MCS API perspective, what the discussion, I think, is what we want to advise people who are implementing these controllers, how to use it, either this, or if we want to recommend something else, or, I don't know where this might go, but if they're running multiple MCS controllers at once. So this is kind of the ping over to this use case that Jeremy got CC'd on in this specific pull request. And a little bit more background that I think is helpful. This is like lifted from the MCS API doc, so this is a reminder for everybody, but just looking for some things we say explicitly about the MCS controller. In the definition of the MCS controller and the MCS API, sort of this bolded part is the interesting thing, which is that we say it might be a single controller, multiple decentralized controllers, or like a human. So this is kind of where this leader election becomes relevant to us. And things that this MCS controller has to be able to do is manage the lifecycle of service imports and endpoint slices, and deal with cluster connectivity issues, and then maybe your leader election thing here, right? So that's some general background, just to make sure we're all on the same page. I think some potential starting questions here. It sounds like there's some interest in what we were just saying about, what's some more background about what Istio's problems are. But I think there's sort of one direction this conversation could take, which is for this specific PR, what is there something we might recommend in terms of what this key is or what this key comparison function is? And then something else I wanted to bring up is people have been talking about Raft, and then Raft talks about Paxos, which are apparently two popular consensus algorithms. Maybe everybody else knows about them, but they were new to me. And since that comes up a lot, I just wanted to clear the air on what, if anything, does that have to do with either, this in general, or, from more relevantly from an MCS API perspective. And one thing I did like while I was looking around, etcd has this cool page with lots of problems in diagram form that they had to solve. So that just might give us some food for thought at some stage as well. So that's kind of my set the stage. Jeremy, do you think these questions represent something you want people to talk about in this group?
Yeah, I think this is exactly the kind of thing I was thinking about, is basically, do we want to either suggest or create patterns for coordinating multiple clusters? And I think, Raft shows up as interesting because etcd has a fairly pluggable Raft implementation that seems like we could do something with to help kind of create a standard deployment pattern or something, or for controllers, maybe a library, I don't know. But is this some, like, the SIG seems like the right place to tackle this problem. But how do we want to tackle it?
Yeah, I think that this is a very interesting problem that's relevant to our scope in the SIG. There's a continuum of things that we could do, like the least we can do is nothing. Right? Something that is probably helpful that is short of writing code is like classifying and documenting these patterns. So like, here's another one that I've seen folks that are implementing things that like chat between multiple clusters is like, if you're implementing some kind of hub, figuring out how to like factor your API so that you don't absolutely like DDoS an API server with
Right.
like status updates is an like probably arguably an adjacent problem to the leader election one, that I think that there's I would be willing to bet you all a crisp $2 bill, that and I'll show you which one I'd bet you. I'd bet you one of these crisp $2 bills, if you can see that. Yeah, look at that.
Fancy.
That there are enough folks that have faced this that could come and speak to us about what they did, and enough folks that are either struggling with it now or will struggle with it in the near future, that like the leader election one and like the how do you factor your status rights to hub type things, to get the right mix of responsiveness and like overall controllable QPS. I think that both of those are things we can explore here. I'd be very interested in having the gentleman that opened the pull request come and tell us a little bit more about the leader election thing. Because it's the kind of thing, for example, that I think a picture would be worth 1,000 words. The background you gave, Jeremy, was really interesting, but like when I think of work artifacts that we could produce that would help the community, like one that requires no coding but is still probably really helpful is like categorizing different classes of these types of situations. Like forget about the solution, but just classifying these are the types of problems that we've seen probably can be very inspirational, or at least like validating to people in the space that like they're not the only ones that have had to deal with this. Something that's more work is producing code to assist people. I'd be open to any of those.
I have a question on that. Is some of this either already happening or the responsibility of either like API machinery or like Cube Builder or like the frameworks for creating controllers? Is that like the place that a recommendation like this would actually really live?
That's an excellent question, and there's absolutely an overlap there.
Yeah.
So we should keep in mind that that like there's other groups and individuals outside the typical audience for this particular like SIG meeting that are likely interested. Categorizing things and like collecting use cases is probably helpful to like at a minimum like understand if other folks are interested in the same variants like of these different problems. Like there's probably 3 or 4 other big areas that are adjacent to all of these. So maybe that makes sense as like a way to proceed, to kind of collect and categorize them, have illustrations to like help communicate exactly what they are. Like I would imagine that like the situation where you have like going back to the leader election one, where you have like n number of controllers, m number of clusters, probably has very different properties at different values of m and n, for example. So like that's something that we can do without stomping on anybody else's toes, that can help those conversations that we'll eventually have with other adjacent like SIGs within Kubernetes go smoother and get people onto the same page faster.
Yeah, that I agree. That makes a lot of sense. Like, I'm not aware of any other efforts in this space for multi-cluster. I think it's kind of on us to drive, but I imagine that as soon as things start getting more real, other SIGs will get involved for sure.
Gotcha. So going back to wherever I wrote what you said about the Istio case. that their trick is to figure out which instance is responsible for the Istio configuration for each cluster. And I think in our case, if we had multiple MCS controllers that need to determine like who wins in a certain case, this is the list of things it has to do, which is seems a little bit more decentralized from this very brief information about Istio, I guess. I guess what I'm trying to seed the group for is brainstorming, like, is there specific properties about how the MCS controller should work that are cases of needing to do leader election in a certain way that we might want to start writing down now? So like this case came up, cross-region controller, and geographically closest was like an explicit case.
Yeah.
So I'd be very curious. I think Stephen is on. Yeah, Stephen, like, is there anything that comes to mind from work on Submariner that like anything, any cache hits, L1 cache hits that come to mind that might be nuggets that you think would be useful to share around like the leader election thing or anything else in the neighborhood of what we've been discussing?
Yeah, well, so in Submariner itself, we don't do cross-cluster leader election yet, as far as I'm aware. We do in-cluster leader election to choose among multiple gateways when multiple gateways are available. I think we just use the CD algorithm there. But yeah, that's something we've been discussing on and off to support multiple brokers, basically for failover. And so the consensus there is probably to go with Raft ultimately, because that's something that we're fairly familiar with, having implemented it in Open Daylight. But yeah, there's nothing particularly earth-shattering that springs to mind from Submariner.
Gotcha.
Apart from the fact that it would definitely be interesting, and we can see a number of scenarios where it would be relevant. Yeah.
Anybody else on the call? If anything comes to mind, I'd be very interested in hearing it. Something you've struggled with in the past, currently struggle with, anticipate future struggles with.
I don't know if this is covered here, I guess, but another thing that I was talking to somebody else about was if your controller is multi-tenant and you want to like reduce blast radius, if that's like a means by which you might choose leader election differently for different tenants if you have multiple versions of the controller. So same as, like, fundamentally the same as different regions geographically, but now it's like I'm multi-tenant and I want to optimize different tenants different ways. So that's one, just put it there. Sorry, my dog is snoring. Well, I can also leave this slides, or we can make more of a doc. I might be the only person who loves slides as much as I do, but feel free to edit or ping in the Slack or add it to the notes too as we're talking about it, because fundamentally, I think at this stage, we're definitely looking for concrete cases, even if it ends up that they're very similar, like that they have the same problems, I think that's still information that we can either package up, as Paul says, with a couple pictures and say these are the cases that are concrete for MCS controllers that have been happening in the wild, and if we're going to come up with something general for Kubernetes decentralized controllers, then here's this info. I think even if they all end up being kind of the same pattern, that's still information that's useful.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. And I do personally like your slides. I think they do a good job of moving conversations forward.
Thanks. I wanted to make a joke that probably my obituary should be in Google Slides form with Google Draw diagrams, because I'm such a slides fan. So I think that's well known in the SIG at this point. Cool. Well, is there anything else? These other questions, is there things people feel specifically about this PR or still digesting? Or is that, Jeremy, would you say that's kind of too narrow, or Paul too? Do you think that's too narrow of a purview of, with all the, what we were just talking about, the different stages of things we could suggest, commenting on the single PR might be a pretty narrow scope?
I think we lost Paul first, but I think the PR is useful. It seems like it's useful in general for other things. It just doesn't solve all of the use cases that we are that I think we need to focus on in this SIG. Just some of them, but I'll probably follow up with a comment to that effect.
Yeah, I guess specifically with this PR, if this was going to be useful, an implementer of the MCS controller would use this leader election package and establish some key and key comparison potentially to solve for either their cross-region situation or multi-tenant or this gateways thing. And that's where the scope of this PR intersects with the scope of our general issues, right?
Right. Yeah, I think I like Paul's suggestion of kind of starting with categorizing. Without that, I think it's hard to make statements about this is how you should configure your key comparison function.
Right.
I don't think we really know all of the problems that we need to solve. So maybe start by gathering some use cases from people, and I'll get the PR authors to come talk maybe at our next meeting in 2 weeks. Oh yeah, and on that note, reminder for everyone, we're going to switch to bi-weekly. We talked about that last week, so there will not be a meeting next week. Starting this week, we'll go to bi-weekly.
All right, cool. Definitely see if we can talk to them. And in my vision, I brought this page up because I feel like this. I know Paul's gone, so he can't comment, but this kind of overlaps with what he was talking about. If there was a version of something like this page, but for our MCS use cases, that would have a lot of portability in this conversation everywhere we might go. So that's kind of what I envision.
Yeah.
Cool. That's all I had.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Laura, for both topics this week. I think that is our agenda, unless anyone has anything else they want to add. All right. We will see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks a lot.
Cool. See ya.